We are going to get more and more disasters, but the disasters will particularly hit certain places. And that's because of how human beings have built in those places. Bombay is a perfect example.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Stop the interview. So when we talk about this AI, and I know you've not gone into that as much, but taking over, the fact of the matter is if metal, if minerals, if all these things can have some sort of mind space and communicate and all that, I mean, if that's really possible, what end?
That's the thing. I mean, we were never alone on this planet. You know, there were always many other kinds of beings here with us.
And I think you mentioned that also, that we've just imposed on ourselves this right to be the most sovereign, powerful, dominant alpha species when perhaps we're not.
No, trees are definitely the ones that are the most powerful, if you ask me. Look at all these stories about these Gujarati families that are dying on the border between Canada and the US. They freeze to death with their children. And once you look at their stories, actually most of them are from fairly well-off families. Some of them were teachers or something. Why do they choose to...
So why is this the promised land in this case? What's the lure?
That's exactly it. It's a fantasy.
All right. Great honor for us to have, well, we've had a few intellectuals, but this is as A-grade premium as you can get. A man who my mother-in-law, and so I have to do this correctly, is a huge fan of. I mean, Elvis-type fanhood, you know. Hate to use that as an analogy, but, you know, try to explain to... I'm actually talking to my own people who themselves are now backward in terms of references. And so, you know, I don't know who's listening anymore. But my mother-in-law, who lives in Hyderabad, a huge fan, and has told me that before this ends, I need to get an autograph with her name on it. And you have to understand that when intellectuals become celebrities, those that follow them, that cult is much deeper and stronger. Although not perhaps as large as, say, a cricket following or a rock star following, but it is much more profound, the impact. So I have to do this, or I cannot go to Hyderabad ever again. So here we are, the one and only Amitav Ghosh. Let me get the name right first. Is it Amitabh?
No, what you said is fine.
But then why is Amitabh Bachchan Amitabh? Because I've told that's Bengali as well.
Do people call him Amitabh?
I'm not
I've
sure.
Never heard that. No, everyone says Amitabh.
That's the version now, but what would be the authentic?
Well, he's from UP.
That's true, but the name is Bengali, apparently.
No, the name is, it's one of the names of the Buddha.
Oh,
yeah.
I stand corrected. We start on a horrible note, as usual, back of the class. Yeah, I just wanted to bring up in the beginning that Toto, Shubhankar, who's our sound guy, also Bengali, so he thinks of himself as the artistic type. Now, let's flex now. Do you have the guts? Yeah. All right. So Amitav Ghosh's book is called Wild Fictions, Essays. It's a collection of essays, articles, speeches that you've given as well in IIT Kharagpur, for example, and also a collection of other scholars that you value.
Yeah.
I think there's a young Shantanu who you've sent fan letter to. We'll come to that at some point. So we'll try. I've written some notes down in my own way. Let me show you my notes just to impress you. Handwritten, born in 1971, so handwritten.
Wow.
Everything is spoilt and whatever. But bear in mind that my favorite writer was Alexander Dumas, who was a horrible handwriting, apparently. Whatever manuscripts, no one can read them. They were terrible. And my other big, people I worship are the Beatles. And John and Paul wrote "I Want to Hold Your Hand" on a brown paper bag in a bus.
Really?
Number one in 3 weeks.
Wow.
One of the greatest songs, just 3 chords, very simple lyrics, but number one. So I'm just saying it's not always the cover when you judge the book. All right, we'll come to all the points there. But Amitav, before we start, there's this point both in the beginning and towards the end as well about this monsters, which are using not for humanity so much as, maybe you'll explain it better, but the environment, the climate, the things that are happening around us. Of course, we are responsible in some way. But this was used by somebody else.
Yes, it's a quote from a famous Italian trade unionist, leftist called Antonio Gramsci. And he wrote that, the old order is dead and the new order is waiting to be born. And in between is a time of monsters. And it's actually one of the most quoted sayings of our time. Everyone says it now. So I'm not the only one.
But just to understand, by monsters, we are talking about everything, whether it's September 11th kind of thingy, or it's the pandemic, earthquakes. We've had all kinds of actually natural disasters in the last 20 years as well, which are mentioned here. And people sort of forget because the modern world is so quick. You just get on with it.
Yeah.
Offline, we were talking about COVID just now, for example, and it's almost like history.
Yep. No one wants to think about it anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was just such an incredible global trauma.
Yeah.
People have just been traumatized by it. And certainly the whole generation of young people, who missed school and college, their performance, their educational performance now is absolutely catastrophic.
That's one part of it. The other part for me is the fear. It's sort of, it's almost like classical conditioning. You're now trained to feel fear. Yes. And the paranoia goes on to the next generation. And then they're already covering their mouths and running away. And, the looks we used to get if somebody coughed. My God. I mean, now we're laughing about it, but it was, you cough and you're like the murderer. You're the arsonist of the lane or something. I mean, a guy.
Yes.
How the world has changed. But yeah, we've got so much to talk about. I don't know how much we can fit in 1 hour. I'll try my best. I want to just talk a little bit because of speaking to my wife. Rarely we talk, but because of you bring families together. And I was telling him that my mother-in-law, Iqbal, is a great lover of these book clubs and all, which a generation before, and generations before that, was very prominent in India, in urban India at least. To study great works and sort of debate and discourse and banter. And it's so much fun actually when I think back when I was a young man. Now all that seems to have gone for a toss. But the interesting thing is I was having a dosa with my wife, which she paid for, thank God. And she mentioned the Sea of Poppies.
Yeah.
From the trilogy.
Yeah.
And was explaining to me how the Parsis used, how do I put this delicately because I have to face the community at some point, the drug trade. That's how they prospered. Is this correct in a nutshell?
No, it's not really because...
thank God. Bachi gayo, as we say in Gujarati.
Because every commercial community in Western India was involved in the opium trade. Mm-hmm. Absolutely every single one. Muslims, Hindus, Parsis. For example...
There was no judgment call on it. It was just commerce.
See, what happened is that the British Empire turned opium into an article of mass trade, as it were, because they were facing a huge trade deficit with China. So they started growing opium on a sort of absolutely industrial scale, but that was in Purvanchal, that is around Patna, between Patna and Banaras.
Is that why some of those states are not as elevated as they should be?
That is exactly why.
Okay.
And that's...
I'm just trying to be flippant. What are you doing? They'll shoot me.
No. It's. I mean, that's an argument I make in my book called Smoke and Ashes.
Yeah.
I think you can absolutely trace the underdevelopment of Purvanchal to the British opium. It wasn't a plantation system, but it was a cultivation system, So what happened then is that when people saw that the British were profiting so vastly from opium, people in the West then decided, well, why don't we also make a profit from it? Mm-hmm. So then they got into it on a large scale. The British tried to control them, but they couldn't because the merchants here were too clever. And they found their way around the British, and it became the basis of the prosperity of Western India. That's really the difference between Western and Eastern India. In Eastern India, opium was a British monopoly, and they could never establish that monopoly in Western India, thanks to the Marathas, actually, because the Maratha states managed to fight them off.
Okay, now you're saying thanks to the Marathas, but we're pushing the drug envelope in a sense, yeah.
But so what was different about the Parsi role in opium is that unlike the Hindu and Muslim merchants, the Parsis actually traveled from Bombay to China, to what is now Guangzhou. They used to call it Canton. So they were that was the only unique thing about them. They went from here all the way to China and back.
So they were ambassadors in a sense.
No, they were traders. They just went, as part of the trading community. See, what happened is that the Parsis had close connections with the Dutch, going back to Surat, And because of that, the Dutch helped them establish these connections with China.
Also with one eye against the British, thinking maybe...
Yes.
Yeah. Divide and conquer from their side as well.
That's right.
All right, just got that in. That was the personal information. Of course, he's written so many books and there are lots of references that they tie in from context from here, goes back to context from there. So we'll see what we can get. Let's start. I've written the backdrop of the LA fires. I think when you mentioned the age of monsters, etc., and I think it's still going on as we record this. It's not like it's completely quelled. How did that happen? And
these particular LA fires are the perfect example of the monstrousness of what we are seeing.
Exactly.
Because, these, especially that area, Malibu, has had these recurrent fires going back to the early 20th century. I mean, it's just a fire-prone landscape. It's always happened. The way that the Santa Ana winds come through the crevasses of the Santa Monica Range is such that these fires have happened, decade for a very long time, going back in history.
But in 100 years, you haven't had this kind of devastation. You have the odd fire.
No, there have been repeated fires, yes. But what happens is that every time these fires happen, they build back on an even larger scale. So, time after time, the fires have completely devastated Santa Monica. But every time it happens, the next time around, they build on an even larger scale, and then there's an even larger fire. But that's not the only reason. Because of climate change now, there's an even greater desiccation of the soil. And that tends to contribute hugely to the... So this fire is much larger in scale, you're right. And that's because of climate change. But so it's a perfect example of, how climate change, the monstrousness of climate change, how it's interacting with the monstrousness of human beings. Because actually people should not be building there.
Okay, so that's like a passive human failure in a sense. But is there active arson also involved?
I believe there's someone's been caught on suspicion of arson. But the fires have happened since time immemorial in those mountains. You don't even need an arsonist, really. It can come about, from the sparks from a car. Often that's the reason. That's what sets off these fires. Even a tiny spark. It's so dry now, and especially because of climate change, the dryness is such that it's the smallest spark can set off a fire. But again, the whole point of it is that it's the real estate interests that actually get people to live in those areas.
True, but the president or elect says there is no climate change issue.
He's changed his mind about this because in 2000
he's flexible now.
In 2009, he actually signed an ad that was printed in the New York Times, petitioning the government to act on climate change.
Pre-politics.
It was pre-politics. Look, he's a real estate guy,
Yeah.
And many of his properties are threatened by climate change. So he knows perfectly well climate change is happening.
Before we move on, so here's the question. First world country, the country people look up to, and when these things happen, it's a little scary for us, thinking that they would have more security and safeguards in place, you would think. But as you mentioned in the book, it's almost like because of what we have done, and this climate change growing at a very fast rate, things are going to just... Is it possible? I don't sound very bleak and all that, or Kali Yuga, everybody's, people talk like that. But is it possible that we're all going to get more and more disasters? Or are we just imagining this?
We are going to get more and more disasters, but the disasters will particularly hit certain places. And that's because of how human beings have built in those places. Bombay is a perfect example.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Stop the interview. First the Parsis, now Bombay. I got nothing left. All right.
Well, I wrote a book called The Great Derangement, which is about climate change. And I've got a whole sort of chapter there showing Bombay's risks, the risk profile. Bombay represents an incredible concentration of risk.
Getting submerged.
Yeah, because Bombay is really just 6 islands which were filled in over the course of like 200 years. But you never reclaim land from the sea because the sea will always take it back.
Ouch, it's all reclaimed.
Yeah. That's right.
What about where I live? The poor live in a place called Malabar Hill. We're on a hill. Are we safe?
No, you're safe.
We're safe! Sorry, I'm a little immature. Perhaps the wrong person for the interview.
Malabar Hill, you're safe.
My God. So according to Amitav Ghosh, Malabar Hill will survive. Pali Hill may survive. So these are the places where you have to... Wow, our real estate will really, go through the roof. I could sell it and move to Naples or something.
You could do that even now. In Naples, a house costs nothing compared to what's true.
Italians in a couple of villages, Italian PM apparently has said that just come, we'll give you the place to stay in.
They're giving away properties for like $10.
What's happening with the world, Mr. Ghosh? When did all this happen?
I know the world is a very bewildering place.
This book, please pick it up and read it. Let me show you the cover, everybody, because it, I think more than answers any questions, it opens many questions and doors, and you start thinking a little bit about, not to put fear in everybody, but, it's an entertaining book.
I think we should put fear in everybody. in the present state of the world, we should all be very, very afraid.
He's saying it with a smile. This is how my wife talks to me. Well, she doesn't smile that much. I'm sorry, the second reference of the wife. Let's go on to the Bangladesh. So we're going through the book, through some of the chapters. Bangladeshi refugees, amongst the most number of refugees in the history of refugees. Tell us a little bit about that, because that's an underplayed sort of part of the world for us Indians. We sort of don't know that much about our neighbor Bangladesh, which we sort of created.
Well, my family is actually originally from Bangladesh.
Yeah, you mentioned that. Yeah.
I have a long connection with it. But so what happened is that around about, there was a so-called European migration crisis. You must have read about it. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of people crossing the Mediterranean, crossing from the Balkans in incredibly dangerous circumstances. And we were always told that these people are all from like war-ravaged countries in the Middle East and Africa and so on. But it turns out that actually a very large percentage of them were Bengalis, a lot of them from Bangladesh. So I became very interested in this phenomenon. And in 2016, I went off to Italy and I went to all these migrant camps and I interviewed a lot of them. And it was very interesting to see what had actually taken place and why they were undertaking these incredibly dangerous journeys, from Libya across the Mediterranean in these rickety old boats.
And I think you mentioned it, and it's not really worth it. They land up there and then not sure.
Absolutely not worth it. I don't think I spoke to a single person who did not regret having set off on this journey.
I think you've mentioned about how adamant one person was and, wanted to get there, whatever happens. And then they realized after. Why were they so? What was the reason to leave? I mean, is it such a desperate situation where you are? Or were people paranoid? Did they get wrong information?
They're not by no means desperate. That's the thing. I mean, Bangladesh has a higher per capita GDP than India. Yes. It's a fairly prosperous country.
They passed us a few years back. Yeah.
They did several years back. On all development indices, Bangladesh is much better than India.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So it's a phenomenon that's very hard. You can't explain it merely through desperation,
Is it a Bengali thing, the need
Not
to travel?
Not at all. Look at all these stories about these Gujarati families that are dying on the, on the border between Canada and the US. They freeze to death with their children. And once you look at their stories, actually most of them are from fairly well-off families. Some of them were teachers or something. Why do they choose to...
So why is this the promised land in this case? What's the lure?
That's exactly it. It's a fantasy. It's entirely a fantasy. It's a fantasy that has now become incredibly powerful because of social media, because of all that they see on television. Their entire fantasy life is lived in that way. And this fantasy operates also within the United States. I mean, I've often, I often visit universities and talk to these kids and everything. Many of them have grown up in the Midwest. Many of them are from these farmer families, Not a single one of them wants to remain in the Midwest. They all want to go to either New York or San Francisco or LA. Why? Because they see it on television, they see it on film. That's what their aspirations are.
Very different from the Parsi community where you don't leave your mother, whatever happens. Parts of India, not just the Parsi community. Plenty of subcultures similarly kept. Down by the Sea, the 2004 tsunami. That's a very that whole thing about the director and all that, which I read also was both poignant and what is the right word? It's so sad. It's a really sad story.
It was incredibly sad. I mean, it was so incredibly sad to meet this man and to see how he was suffering, from having lost his.
Let's give them a little bit of backdrop about the whole thing. I mean, you visited it right at the point of people again have forgotten. We talked about the pandemic. We've forgotten about the tsunami. It's very much our generation's thing. So life just seems to go on and you just don't look back, and that's what happens. But this was a horrific time. And this is the Nicobar Islands?
The Nicobar Islands was where I went, yes, because it was absolutely devastated by the tsunami. Yeah.
And no one's, again, not to put anyone down, but no one was really turning their eye to Nicobar as much as they would be to some of the slightly more glamorous countries that got affected or regions that got affected. But tell us a little bit about this director fellow. I mean, you only call him director, you know his name, you won't use his name. But, it's a sad but true story.
I arrived in India on the 25th of December. in 2004. Next morning I woke up and there was this, all the news about the tsunami. So then my friend Rahul Bose, your...
Rugby champion.
That's right.
You know there's a stadium in Orissa.
Yes,
named
I know.
Yeah. So
Rahul is a very good friend, and Rahul called me and said, let's go there and see what we can do. So I said absolutely, and I got a commission from the Hindu, and I went off there. And then finally I managed to get on an Air Force plane that was going to the Nicobar Islands, and I went there. On the plane with me was this man, just an ordinary kind of bureaucrat person. And we started talking, and it turned out that he'd lost his entire family. They lived in the Nicobar Islands. He was, I think, I forget exactly what he was doing there, but...
Mid-level bureaucrat.
On the technical side.
Yeah.
He was doing, it was either meteorology or geology or something. So there we were, and then his whole story came pouring out of him. How, he got this phone call the last time he spoke to his family. And, the real sort of pathos of it was how he was picking through the ruins.
Oh, that book story was... Yeah. I mean, even now I'm feeling, teary-eyed immediately, but might as well tell them.
We found his daughter's books written in her handwriting.
Exercise books, yeah.
I said to him, don't you want to take them?
Yeah.
And he said, no. I think he just didn't want to be reminded. I mean, it was just so intensely painful for him. Yeah. He just couldn't bring himself to,
No, it's. I can imagine. I mean, that's, when you lose someone, other normal circumstances also, you can't go to that room, or, there's certain little memories that sense memories hit you immediately. So imagine in this situation with that, and that to a child. Losing a parent losing a child is, God, it's unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
The son does survive, though.
The son did survive, yes. Yeah. One son, his son managed to hold on to a tree, and he survived. But, this director didn't accept that. One of the reasons why he wouldn't pick up the book is because he didn't accept that they were dead, that his wife and his daughter were dead.
So the grieving process had not started.
Yeah, that's right. And for years afterwards, he didn't believe it. He would write to me, for years afterwards, saying, have you had any news? And he would write to
really?
people. Yeah.
Perfectly rational man otherwise.
Completely rational, but he just wouldn't accept that they were dead.
Wow. What did you think? I mean, you're going there with a journalist's or an academic's eye, and you're watching this unfold. Almost you're watching it, I know you're in it, but you're watching it from a perspective. What did you feel about what's happening?
Well, yes, I went there very much with a writer's eye, if you like, a journalist's eye, not knowing what I was going to see or what I was going to find. Just to see that disaster, how it had unfolded. But, the story of that disaster is not over. A lot of the local people, the indigenous people of the Nicobars, they were moved into refugee camps on other islands. And, they've never been allowed to return. And now the government is actually going to take all their land from them and create this huge base, cutting down millions of trees, cutting down the entire primary forest on this island.
This is an excuse to use up the land.
Exactly. It's what's been called disaster capitalism. That's exactly what they're using this disaster.
21 years later, they've still not been rehoused.
They've not been rehabilitated. They've not been allowed to go back to the island. And they're losing all their property.
So this is what you talk about throughout the thread of the book, also about the monsters that are prevalent. It's because of what we are doing.
Exactly.
Without even a thought.
Exactly.
I mean, it's not even insensitive, because I wouldn't even have thought of it unless you pointed it out, for example.
Yeah,
so
it's
ignorance for a lot of people as well, and insensitivity of powers that be across the world.
Exactly.
Not in one country or one region.
That's absolutely right. Yes. We see the same thing happening in Indonesia. We see it happening, across the world, as you say.
Mm-hmm. The book is just pointing out all these things. Many of them are poignant, and there's a lot of pathos. So bear with us, but it's an interesting, as you said, we have to face it. There's no point looking away. Let's talk about, we'll move on to Bangladeshi refugees again. Well, I don't think it's lighter, but it's a little different. Because I saw this with a father and son, a much more vegetarian version of this, when we were young, and the son started vomiting in the car. And so the wife said, can you, just take him out and, tend to him. So they got out of the car, and the first thing he did while the son is vomiting is clean his watch, It's a similar thing, that you sort of, you're just this is more important than what's actually happening in life. That you, in this case, the cell phone and how it's overtaken our thoughts and consciousness. It's like a family member, and you turn to that first.
Yeah, the cell phone has completely sort of captured our consciousness. It's become sort of the invisible being in our lives, which directs everything. So, but especially for migrants, these guys who are moving across continents, the cell phone is like their essential instrument. They pay their dalals with the cell phone. The cell phone shows them where to go. The cell phone charts their route for them. It's through the cell phone that they keep in touch. And it's really so finely tuned that those traffickers can literally switch them from one destination to another overnight. Mm-hmm. I think this is the thing that people don't really understand, that, this kind of migration now, it's achieved a certain momentum simply because it has this technology driving it. And that's why, Europeans, Americans, they're crazy to stop migration, but they're not going to be able to, because as long as this technology exists.
Also, the world has been exposed.
Exactly.
For example, for most of us, it would just be an idea in the 70s and 80s. And then now it's just this, get online and check out this lane somewhere in Brussels, and the guy's heading that way.
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
Not to mention the effects of entertainment. This podcast is consumed by the cell phone. So please, at some point when you have the time, I'm just kidding. Yeah. For me, it's more about watching Rakhi Sawant and people like that. Do you watch any pop culture?
I have to say, I don't really know, not much.
Ouch. That hurt. I thought we could bond on something, climate change. Then let's go to the 200 million people that live on the Bay of Bengal coast, which people, nobody... I had no idea that this area is so large and has such a profound effect on humanity globally. So take us through that, the Bay of Bengal and the role that...
Well, the Bay of Bengal, it's incredible. 1 out of every 4 human beings on the planet lives in a country that touches upon the Bay of Bengal. It's incredible. I mean, Indonesia, vast as it is, India, Burma, everything. Yeah, we don't pay that much attention to the Bay of Bengal, but the Bay of Bengal is a very, very important force in our lives. The reason that we are talking about the Bay of Bengal is because these dead spots have appeared. These immense stretches of water that are anoxic in the sense that they don't have any oxygen.
Amitav, use words like anoxic and all. I just don't know what to do, because I won't be allowed to use my cell phone to translate it. But go ahead.
It means water that has no oxygen in it, so fish can't survive.
So literally dead water.
It's dead water.
Marine life.
Completely empty of marine life, except for certain kinds of microscopic creatures that can survive on sulfur. So sulfur, the thing of the devil.
Wow.
So
coming soon at a Chinese eatery next to you.
So it's a terrifying thing. I mean, 200 million people depend on the fisheries of the Bay of Bengal, and these fisheries are disappearing. It's just as bad, however, mind you, in the Arabian Sea.
But is it already too late?
Nature does rehabilitate itself very, very fast when people stop doing really terrible things.
So the Dead Sea can come alive again?
I don't know if that's true for the Dead Sea.
What's the word you used?
Anoxic.
Anoxic can be unanoxic?
The reason why it's anoxic is because, of runoff from fertilizers, basically. Mm-hmm. There's so much fertilizer use in India. The runoff that goes with the rain, it just carries huge amounts of nitrogen, etc.
Well, there's 7 countries involved, not just us. We are the largest.
But we are the biggest.
Yeah, we are the biggest. But I would like them to take some blame as well. Because no one is like a green country around us either.
Have you been to Myanmar?
I haven't been to Myanmar ever since the rebels called and said, we'd like you to do a show with us, and I wasn't comfortable, so I haven't gone. Yeah.
Myanmar's incredibly green.
Is it?
Yeah.
How?
Incredibly green. Well, simply because, in a sense, modernity passed them by, So it's actually unbelievable.
So what you're saying is, without progress, we're safe?
I mean, certainly...
the Prime Minister speaks of Vikas, for example. You're not a big fan. We can't progress.
There are paths of improvement everywhere. But the sorts of paths that we've chosen and that are increasingly chosen around the world are very destructive.
This is a horrible debate to have, because they'll keep telling you, reclaim the land, kill the mangroves, those kind of things. I mean, it all goes hand in hand. To make, you break. To break, you make. It's like that.
You can think like that simply because you are protected here in Bombay by the 10,000 hectares of mangroves that the Godrej family have preserved.
Right.
I mean, they've done this incredible service to this city. Because if they had allowed that land to be built upon, you would be much more vulnerable than you are.
But what are we supposed to do? Because for those who say that, look, there's just too many people, it's difficult to commute, etc., to go and build these bridges, these metros, to reclaim land left, right and centre, that's the only way forward. There doesn't seem to be any other way forward. What are we supposed to do?
There's a very good way forward. And actually, my very dear friend Charles Correa laid the plans for it, which is Navi Mumbai.
He built my building.
You live in Himalaya, Kanchenjunga.
One of his pet projects. Makes no sense. One floor's like this, one floor's like that. Maybe he drank a lot that night. I don't know. So you were saying?
He saw all these problems coming, approaching, and he laid out the plans for Navi Mumbai. I think, if you want to create increasing numbers of settlements, you should definitely be in Navi Mumbai rather than here, because...
We tried to move the parliament, the Vidhan Sabha, to Navi Mumbai. They didn't go. There's an empty building.
When they will go is when...
they submerge Marine Drive.
When Mumbai is hit by a major cyclone, which is going to happen sooner or later.
Ouch. Seriously?
Absolutely, yeah.
Oh, no, really scaring me. When, give me any idea?
It's actually just a period of good luck over the last 150 years that Mumbai hasn't been hit by a major cyclone.
Podcast. I'm so worried. I think I'm urinating as we speak.
This is a scenario of which you should really be filled with fear and dread. Because
stop smiling, Mr. Ghosh. It's not helping. It's almost like you're in Canada or something far away. And he's so how is Marine Drive?
We are all equally vulnerable. You can't escape this thing. It's everywhere. I mean, I'm sure people in Los Angeles thought they were safe.
That came out of left field. I mean, honestly, it's amazing with the meteorological departments and technical advancements and technology and software and data that even now we're not able to predict things correctly on time. For whatever reason. So much for science. Science, buck up. You're far behind as far as we're concerned. Humanity is worried. One of our great intellectuals is saying so we have to listen. It's different when the government says so. Of course, my part of Mumbai, now that you brought it up, I might as well vent a little bit. They close it down. We've got this horrid marathon going on Sunday. So they shut everything while skinny legs run around the city for hours at a time. And, every single politician, the chief minister, the opposition, swearing in, agitation, Maratha this, Maratha that, everybody comes to our part of town and shuts it down. So we submerge that part of town. Where will they go? That's the only happy thought I have, if I may say so in a perverse fashion. We'll take a break and then come back. He has to go to many places. We don't have his time. We have just about an hour. So a quick break, then we come back. But once again, the book, please go and buy it. It's called Wild Fictions, and I dare say it's almost more like Wild Truth.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
There you go. We'll take a break.
Hey, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. From Amazon Music presents India Pod Day 2025. In association with IVM Podcast, we bring you a special episode of Cyrus Says with Cyrus Brocha, who is joined by the Internet Said So gang. Also, Puneet Pania and a surprise guest for a laughter-packed ride. From bizarre internet facts to comedy and food, it has it all. On A Century of Stories India, Kunal unveils how Leo Tolstoy's letters shaped Gandhi's philosophy of non-violence. On Get Real About Wealth, Sonia chats with Tahir Badshah, CIO of Invesco Mutual Fund, about personal wealth, investing and balancing finance with mental health. Folks, if you like our show, spread the word. Tell your friends and don't forget to rate and review them wherever you're listening to them. Follow us on our social media. We are at IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and LinkedIn. You'll also find all our shows on YouTube channel by their show name, so do look out for them and have fun watching. And finally, we would like to thank our sponsors this week: IDFC First Bank, Axis Mutual Fund, SBI Mutual Fund, ICICI Prudential Mutual Fund, IndusInd Bank, HDFC Bank.
With my good friend Amitav Ghosh. Didn't know that Rahul Bose and him are good pals, so that brings us a little closer. 6 degrees of separation, so to speak. Not really. In fact, there's a boast. I'll jump to the end and then we'll come back to the thing. There's a boast towards the end, I think, in your acknowledgements where you mentioned this guy, I think J.C. Bose.
Yes.
Who talks about... I want to mention this here because this is also slightly... It's scary, but it's also perhaps nice. He talks about the sentient nature of everything.
Yeah.
Plants especially. And I think you mentioned rocks and things like that, but let's take it one thing at a time. And he was sort of... initially, people were interested in what he said and then they scoffed and said, no, where's the science?
Yeah. That's basically what happened.
Yeah.
So he was this physicist who actually made some very revolutionary discoveries especially in radio communications and so on. He was a very skilled maker of instruments. So he made these very, very sensitive instruments that could test the responses of plants and even of metals. So he would subject the plant to some sorts of stimuli, and you could see the plant could actually feel things. It could feel pain. It could feel, shock. And now we all know that plants do communicate with each other. Trees communicate with each other.
My God. So you can't even talk openly in front of a tree anymore.
I know, and that plant behind you is judging you.
No. This is IVM. Everything is fake, including me. We have no sense of sincerity here. That's what should not be there. It's a type of product which is banned in the market. Just looks like a plant. Much cheaper that way. You don't have to water them. So talk about metals and rocks and all that. I mean, that now is, we used to laugh at fairy tales and fantasies growing up. And then suddenly this is almost, again, your book is mentioning this, what we thought is may not be.
Yes.
Which is also center of the whole book. So is this true, or are we just, it's mind-boggling.
It is mind-boggling, but that's, the nice thing is now that all our ideas about the world are collapsing. We realize that we've always that we've misunderstood what the world actually is. It's very different.
Socrates was right. All we know is we know nothing.
Yes.
Come back to that. But
Yes.
again, just for a second to think about that. So when we talk about this AI, and I know you've not gone into that as much, but taking over, the fact of the matter is, if metal, if minerals, if all these things can have some sort of mind space and communicate and all that, I mean, if that's really possible, what end?
That's the thing. I mean, we were never alone on this planet. There were always many other kinds of beings here with us.
And I think you mentioned that also, that we've just imposed on ourselves this right to be the most sovereign, powerful, dominant alpha species, when perhaps we're not.
No, trees are definitely the ones that are the most powerful, if you ask me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we think we are gardening the trees. I think the trees are gardening us. Because, if there is a sort of general collapse of civilization and, billions of people die, imagine that's all food for the trees.
Wow. Last tree standing. That's going to be my book. Can you imagine? I can't believe this is coming true. I was just thinking back to fairy tales that we grew up on, many of the German ones, with the trees talk and, Jack and the Beanstalk and those kind of things. And the trees are very, very prominent in those. Maybe they knew more than we thought they knew.
They definitely
It's
know
not
more
fantasy.
than we think.
Ouch.
Yeah, the trees are, as species, they're much older than us. They'll outlast us. Yeah.
No, I have a pet tree. I shouldn't say that. Ouch. You might be listening, at the Oval Maidan, which is about 140 years old, so the Mali tells me. And it looks like that's huge, with deep roots and all. It survived whatever we've had, little, in terms of semi-cyclonic movements over the years, etc. and all that. But it's amazing, the longevity and the ability to sustain and survive.
But also their intelligence. If you have any of those creepers in your house, you'll see how they
relatives, you
reach
mean?
out. They know where to go.
Yeah. How do they do that?
They know. They can
You're
see
right,
things.
because they're almost, the path is sort of, how do they know which path to take?
They're very sensitive to everything around them. So
They're
they
tactile.
figure it out. Yeah, absolutely. They have a certain kind of tactile intelligence, yes.
So when you talk, loosely about someone who's unable to move, a human being, and say that he's like a vegetable or a plant, that's actually the wrong thing to
Yes.
say. Because the
Yes.
plant is actually, or the vegetable might actually move much more than you know. And
Exactly.
so
Exactly.
be careful with your language. Auntie. It's one lady who watches the show. All right, let's get back to some of the other. I don't know how much time we have. We'll try and quickly. We've done enough of Sundarbans, and we'll go somewhere else. Shantanu Das in World War I, the fan letter. I like that immensely. That you were so impressed by this man. Please tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it's a long story, but, I wrote a book called Flood of Fire, which is about the first Opium War.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of Indian sepoys took part in that Opium War. And when I was writing about these sepoys, I wanted to write about, how they thought about the world, how they experienced the world. Unfortunately, these sepoys never wrote about their own lives, So I started reading, works written by Indian soldiers later. And in the process of that, I came to the work of an academic called Shantanu Das, who's actually been writing about Indian soldiers in the First World War. And through that, I came upon these two memoirs that were written by, one was a doctor, the other one was a kind of ambulance guy. And they wrote these completely amazing books about the Mesopotamian campaign in the First World War. So it was Shantanu's work that led me to it. So which is why I wrote him a fan letter.
It's a lovely letter. Please read the book and read the letter, page 86, if I remember correctly. But what's interesting, not interesting, but it keeps going on from there. World War One was almost like the war we don't know about. It's almost the hidden war in a sense. We had how many? I don't know if you remember the statistics that you've written, but a million plus in battle from our continent, plus more than half of that as non-combatants. That's a lot of people affected.
Yeah, I mean,
and fighting a war they don't really know anything about. And for whom they're not sure. And the enemy they don't even know. They have no idea.
That's right. And actually, one of the first engagements of the First World War was the Mesopotamian campaign, because the British wanted to hold on to the oil fields of the Middle East. So almost as soon as the war broke out, they actually sent, this expeditionary force, a lot of which was the 1st Maratha Regiment. Yeah,
they're all Marathi speaking, I read that.
Many of them were Marathi speaking, yes. So they went off to Basra. Then from Basra, they started attacking the Ottomans. At first, it went well. But then the Ottomans made a stand at Kut al Amara, which is the town on the river. And there they besieged the British Expeditionary Force. And basically, they starved them out. It was the greatest battlefield defeat for the British in 200 years. And all these guys were caught in it.
They're going as mercenaries, leaving Pune and places like that to far afield, where they have no idea about the geography or the citizenry, or the army they're facing or fighting. And that's just amazing that you land up there and you're fighting a war which you have no idea about to some extent.
Well, I wouldn't say that they had no idea. They were very intelligent people. They figured out. I think it'd be wrong to think that
nobody was thinking maybe morally why we're here.
They did think that, but if you are from India at that particular point in time, the army is one of the very few, avenues of employment. What are you going to do? I mean, my father was in the British Indian Army. I mean, Dr. Ambedkar's father was, also in the army. That was how people had to make a living.
And then we go into that whole story about the Armenians. Again, remember, we're trying to cover as much as we can, so please read the book, because I'm just, going here and there. Armenians and Indians being the two outsiders in a more or less Islamic sort of setting out there, prisoners of wars, etc., that you speak about. So initially they bonded a lot, and then of course there were all kinds of stories.
Yeah, this is one of the most amazing parts of it, because one of these memoirs written by a man called Shishir Shorbodikari, actually he bore witness to the Armenian genocide. So what happened is that after Kut al Amara, all these people are taken prisoners, and then they're sent to these prisoner of war camps. And the war camps are in what is now northern Syria, especially a town called Ras Al Ain. And very near there was one of the major centers of the Armenian genocide. So they bore witness, literally, to the genocide, and wrote about it very movingly. And actually, I was invited to Armenia, on the anniversary of the genocide to talk about what happened. And
just to give an idea, they literally put all the people together, separated the men and the boys, and just did say goodbye to each other, and they just shoot them.
It was one of the early genocides of the 20th century, where they destroyed a lot of the Armenian population of the Middle East. The Armenians were at that point, fairly a prosperous community, a trading community.
Traded with India a lot. In Calcutta.
Yes,
I
very
know a
large
couple of rugby
Armenian
boys who are Armenian descent.
Yeah, that's right. Calcutta still has an Armenian school and an Armenian college.
There's one bright story in that where I think one of the boys does escape. I think he travels with 4 Indian guys, and they decide to keep him, although he'll stand out and blah blah blah. To cut a long story short, but that has a sort of positive ending.
Yeah, they adopted this little boy, and actually the British chaplain or whatever tried to take this boy away from this. He was actually adopted by a jamadar, and the boy wouldn't go. He said no, and he just clung to this Indian guy and came back to Bombay. I don't know what happened to him after that.
But somewhere in India.
Somewhere in India.
All right. Let's look at a couple of others before we look at the AMAs as well. The Indian exodus from, you mentioned Myanmar. the Indian exodus from Burma, again, I had no idea about this. Not that I'm the greatest student of history, but, one tends to read. And tell us about that.
Well, I wrote about the Indian exodus from Burma in my book, The Glass Palace. The last part is set within the Indian exodus. So what happened is that in 1941, when the Japanese attacked Southeast Asia, they moved very quickly on Burma. And Burma had a huge Indian population. Rangoon was primarily an Indian city. And if you go to Rangoon even now, the central part of the city it looks just like Calcutta. Except that it was also largely South Indian. Mm-hmm. So all these guys got completely spooked. They thought the Japanese would attack them and kill them. There was no evidence for that whatsoever. But they left in droves. I mean, like over 1 million of them started walking.
But having said that, the Japanese war crimes are on another level across the two wars.
The Japanese war crimes were horrifying. I mean, especially in China, what they did and elsewhere.
So they didn't do anything in Myanmar?
Not to Indians.
They would have let them live.
The Japanese saw the Indians as potential allies. And in fact, the INA, which was formed, the Indian National Army, which was formed it was formed long before Subhash Chandra Bose, actually. It was it was founded by a guy called Mohan Singh. Mm-hmm. He was a Sikh.
Okay.
It was founded in Singapore. They decided to take sides with the Japanese so that they could, liberate India.
So do they go back post the war? All these merchants and
yes. The entire working class of Rangoon was Indian. All the the people who cleared the night soil, as it was called, all the dock workers. They all left their work and started walking across the mountains. In the beginning, they carried whatever they could with them. But then once they got to the mountains, tens of thousands of them died. It was incredibly difficult walking across those mountains.
But who's the monster here? Because it's almost like, I won't say comedy of errors, but it's almost like, the Japanese weren't going to attack. Now we know in hindsight or whatever. So you sort of panic and there's a little bit of paranoia and then people start crossing and then you have this great migration or whatever you want to call it. And then, and obviously there will be effects of that. But there's no, who do we blame?
Yeah, it was a kind of mass hysteria. I think that's really what it was. The Indians saw themselves as being very identified with the British. And at that particular moment, it wasn't the Japanese they were really worried about. They were worried about the Burmese. Because in 1930, there had been huge anti-Indian riots. They thought that once the British left, the Burmese would turn on them. And in fact, over the years, that has proved to be the case. More and more Indians have actually left. But in fact, to this day in Rangoon, there are large Indian communities. There's a wonderful Durga temple that was endowed by one of my relatives, actually. So when I went there, everybody knew me. They'd been following my work.
The books were being sold outside the mandir.
My books are sold everywhere in Burma.
Wow.
There are true translations of The Glass Palace in Burmese. And, if you drive through Rangoon, the little boys who sell books on the streets,
right,
they often have my books.
Do they sell it to you? Have you ever had that experience?
Yes.
So what do you do? Because you don't have your face on the cover generally. It's there in the last page, but do you point out and say, look?
I just feel
that'd be so much fun.
Happy.
No? But you buy it. What do they say? How do they sell it? Because I know how they do it here in Hajiali in Mumbai.
It's like that.
Yeah, same thing. They sell it. Sir, aapke liye, sir, ye aapke liye hai. They have not read it. No strong thoughts on it. But yeah, let's go to September 11th actually, because I think that's also. You're right there.
Yeah.
Everybody was right there. I think your daughter is at school. And watching? On
September 11th, my daughter was starting at a new school. She was going into middle school. And she was starting at a school which faces across the river towards Lower Manhattan. And my wife dropped her off in the morning. She went off into this new school. My son, who's younger, was with me. He wasn't starting that day. He was going to start a few days later. So suddenly these attacks happened. And my wife called me and said, this is happening. We were all in shock. Suddenly we got a call from the school saying, we are shutting down for the day. So come and get your child. So my son and I set off, walking through Brooklyn with, the towers in the background, and people pouring over the Brooklyn Bridge covered in dust. It was completely unreal. Actually, I had lived through something like that once before in 1984 in November when the Delhi riots.
Oh, here in the Sikh riots. Oh.
Yeah, and then again...
You were there?
I was absolutely
Did you
there.
see all that?
Absolutely. I've
First
written
hand?
Yeah. I wrote an article about it which circulated a great deal. It's not in this book because it was published in an earlier book of essays. So I was very reminded of that, to see a city on fire yet again. But then I went, then my son and I, we went to the school. My daughter was waiting there. And the first thing she said is, Baba, I saw it all through the windows of my history class. And that's what happened. They were sitting in their history class and they saw it all.
It's so surreal, no? And that for a young child to digest. And coming from, your family with all the stories in the background and all that, unimaginable. We're a little pressed for time, but let's get to two people who you've spoken, well, three actually. There's Shashi Tharoor, who invented the English language, very quickly. And then there's PRIYA SATIA.
Yes.
And Ramanujan. But if we can, very quickly. So let's talk about Shashi Tharoor.
Well, Shashi Tharoor, he was 1 year senior to me in college.
Oh, is it?
Yes, and we've been good friends ever since. I know his whole family. His wife grew up in Calcutta, living very close to one of my uncles. So I've known that family also.
How we like to always point out the senior, though. I like it's never done the other way.
Those sorts of hierarchies established themselves very early,
True.
In school life and college life.
Yeah. So were you impressed with his writings, with his thinking, with what he's done?
Absolutely. I think Shashi is an absolutely brilliant man. And, he's extraordinary. I mean, in the 90s, I used to watch him on television, on American television. He was then...
United Nations, yeah.
Yeah, Assistant Secretary General or something. Especially during the Yugoslav wars, he was the only dissenting voice, and he's one of the few people who's articulate enough and... knowledgeable enough to take on anyone who comes at him, so to speak. I mean, he's a miracle to watch. I mean,
he's great, highly entertaining. And I must say, we've been on a few events with him, and he gets huge support.
Absolutely.
I even told him maybe the old party should look at him to front it sometimes, because he can speak. He seems to, people are drawn to him. Some people have that magnetic sort of personality or ability, so we might as well cash in on it. But no one's listening to us. As far as we're concerned, Priya?
Well, Priya, I didn't know when I first read her book, but I think her book is, she's written 2 or 3 books, but one of them is actually called Time's Monster, It's about how the British created a certain kind of history to justify what they were doing, And that was essentially the history that we were also taught in school and college and so on.
The history of bringing up the savage to civilized standards.
Right. That's basically
she's. But in terms of Western thought, we were a little different. So from their perspective, just play devil's advocate for a second. They're looking at coming to a civilization which doesn't think of itself as a national entity.
This is something that we like to think. It's not the case. I mean, in India as elsewhere, the British Empire was basically founded upon the idea of race. And that applied to us just as much as it did to Africans or, anybody else.
All right. No win there for the British. I try to support you guys because I want my visa, but hey, can't do anything. And then we come to Ramanujan, who you didn't actually meet, but you're a fan.
This is A.K. Ramanujan.
who was, not the mathematician.
No, that's right. Though I think A.K. Ramanujan was in his own way just as brilliant. I mean, he was a wonderful writer, translator. Poet, exactly. His book of translations called Speaking of Shiva, where he translates Tamil poetry, medieval Tamil poetry. I mean, it's just one of the most powerful books I've ever read and had a huge influence on me. But A.K. Ramanujan also had this wonderful article called, I think the title was something like, "Is there an Indian way of thinking?" And he argues that there was once upon a time an Indian way of thinking, and it's a completely.
It doesn't exist now, or it's a hybrid now.
It's a hybrid, yes.
Yeah. Well, we've given a lot to the world. I mean, on top of my head, we've given Aryabhatta has given something, and Brahmagupta has given something. There are all kinds of contributions to world society and thought.
It appears
Sanskrit,
that
Tamil.
the Kerala School of Mathematics actually invented calculus.
Oh, there you go.
Yes.
Oh. Of course. How can we trust the Malayalis? I'm just kidding. Just kidding. All right. Love them. All right. Before we finally end this, are there any AMAs? Have we got AMAs? No. Okay. AMAs, but there are questions. There are questions. Do we have time for any more questions? But before we do, I want to ask you one question, which is important. If somebody picks up the book, what do we tell them the book is really about?
Oh my God. I wouldn't even know where to begin because it's about a lot of things. So I would say to them that this is a book where everyone will find something of interest, I think.
Mm-hmm. Also, I think what... I don't know if I should say this because I haven't written the book. I'm just batting for you for a second. Perhaps throw light on the fact that we have done too much in terms of playing with the world and the climate and the environment and things like that. Not to mention wars, internecine wars, civil wars, all this. And now it's time to really look long and hard that, perhaps we've reached a point where on the precipice of civilization collapsing completely at some point. And it's no longer a joke, which perhaps it was to a lot of people.
I think we are at an absolutely critical moment.
I'm just kidding, yeah.
Yeah, I think we're at a very critical moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is the problem is that I think we have this token sort of thing about the environment where we have a movement or we go clean up, Worldly Safe Face or whatever, and then it just ends. Same thing with the HIV AIDS Awareness Day, which we had for many years, December 1st. So everything wears the ribbon, you do a lot of speeches, meet a lot of people talk. People are interested. I'm not saying they're insincere, but December 2nd, it's over. So it's the same problem that we have with the environment. I think what you're trying to say is it's an everyday thing. It's a humanity thing. It's not any boundary. Yeah. I mean, you've mentioned almost the entire globe is covered in this book. So you can't point fingers at one. Of course, there are more powerful civilizations who've done worse. But fact of the matter is we're all guilty.
Yeah, but some are more guilty than others.
Some are more guilty than others. But that's also to do with the fact of the size of the terrain to some extent. And everybody's looking at industry, and Vikas is now is a global word. It's no longer just India. So, I mean, everybody's doing the same thing. China, the USA, I mean, they can't they can do their movements and all, but they've done so much damage already.
Yes, absolutely.
And are paying for that. Amitav Ghosh, thank you so much for being here. Please go and buy the book. And as we say buy, how do you relax? What do you do? Because you seem like a, completely, the intellectual process just, is you. And then you never do anything else.
I do. I listen to music a lot and I cook. I love to cook.
Oh, all right. Music as in rap music, because our Prithvi is a rapper.
I listen to lots of different kinds of music, but not to rap.
Well played.
Sorry?
Which genre? No, it's a free-for-all. We're all asking.
I like world music. I love jazz.
He's doing his best not to say Beethoven, so you don't get upset.
Yes, also Beethoven.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Dun-dun-dun-dun, our time is over. Thank you very much. Parsi. Classical music is in our blood, yeah. Don't worry about that. But he's a rapper. But that's a story for another day. Amitav Ghosh, the legend, one of the great writers of his time. Don't take my word for it. Buy the book. He's written millions of them. They're all fantastic. But this one, the present one, is the one for us to think about, read, buy. It's hardcover. It looks like a book. You look interesting when you walk around with it. People will think you're a person of note. I always walk around with these kind of books, and the girls are like, yeah, that's a special guy. Yeah. That's it? Are you still in Dadar? Oh, you're not in Dadar anymore?
No, I'm not in Dadar.
You've left your father, mother and Dadar. And you've gone. So that's the standard of this show. And now you live in
Bandra.
Typical person who does well, goes to Bandra. We stay back with our parents.
My husband stays there, what do I do? Okay. But now my building has gone into redevelopment.
So they give you another house, no?
Yeah.
You sound like they throw you on the floor. Yeah, abhi ghar nahi hai, kya karega 2 saal and all that.
But you know na how in Bombay, every third building is like constructed and left.
And the timeline is the real humor.
Yes.
They'll tell you 6 mahina. And then
nobody says 3 months, 6 months.
I know. But whatever they say, it's
say.
triple that. It's 3x what they say.
So my builder has said 2 years. So we think it'll take 3 years. So, but we know eventually it'll take 5 years to like finish everything.
I mean, you have your child will not know what house is their house. I mean, suddenly at 4 you'll be like, okay, beta, we have to now go to the real house. What? I love this house. No, beta, that's not the house. Our house is there.
Yeah.
Very careful.
Yeah, that's true.